Everyone in the courtroom laughed when Richard threw a handful of change at his wife, screaming that she was worth less than the coins on the floor. He thought he had won. He thought her silence was weakness. But he forgot one thing: he never actually checked who her father was. He assumed she was a nobody. He was wrong. Dead wrong. In 5 minutes, the doors to the courtroom are going to open, and the man walking through them isn't just going to stop the trial, he's going to buy the entire building. This is the story of how a billionaire in hiding destroyed an arrogant husband without saying a word. The air conditioning in the Southern District of New York courthouse was humming, but it did nothing to cool the suffocating heat of humiliation radiating off Clara van der Hoeven. She sat alone at the defendant's table. Her hands rough from years of pottery and gardening, the useless hobbies her husband Richard liked to call them, were clasped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. She wore a simple navy dress she'd bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago. It was clean-pressed and respectable, yet against the backdrop of the mahogany-paneled courtroom it looked like a costume of poverty. Across the aisle, Richard van der Hoeven looked like a shark swimming in oil. He was wearing a bespoke chiton suit, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, and he was currently leaning back in his chair whispering something to his lead attorney, Silas Blackwood. Silas, a man known in New York legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway, let out a sharp, barking laugh. They were looking right at Clara. Order Judge Harrison mumbled, though he didn't look up from his papers. He seemed bored. To him, this was just another high-net-worth divorce. Another rich man dumping his trophy wife, or in this case, the wife he had seemingly outgrown. "Mr. Blackwood, you may continue your opening statement," the judge said. Silas Blackwood stood up. He didn't walk. He prowled. He adjusted his silk tie and turned to the gallery, which was packed. Richard was a minor celebrity in the finance world, a hedge fund manager who had made a killing shorting tech stocks right before the bubble burst. The press was here. Richard loved the press. "Your Honor." Silas began, his voice smooth as aged scotch. "We are here today to dissolve a marriage that frankly should never have occurred. My client, Mr. van der Hoeven, is a man of industry, a man of vision. He has built an empire worth $400 million through grit, intelligence, and sleepless nights." Silas paused for effect, walking over to Clara's table and looming over her. She didn't look up. She stared at the grain of the wood on the table. "And then we have Mrs. van der Hoeven." Silas said, his voice dripping with mock pity. "A woman who in 7 years of marriage has not contributed a single cent to the household economy. A woman who, we will demonstrate, trapped my client with a sob story about a sick relative, married him for security, and has spent the last decade finding herself while my client paid the bills." Richard snickered audibly. "We are asking not only for a full enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, which grants her a pitiful lump sum of $50,000, but we are also countersuing for emotional damages and fraud. We believe Clara lied about her background to secure the marriage." The gallery murmured. Fraud. It was a vicious move even for Richard. He didn't just want to divorce her. He wanted to destroy her. He wanted to leave her destitute and branded a liar. Clara's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Sarah Jenkins, who looked overworked and terrified, stood up shakily. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance goes to character, Your Honor. Honor." Silas shot back smoothly. "If she lied about who she was to marry him, the marriage is void. She gets nothing, not even the 50 grand. Judge Harrison nodded. "Overruled. Proceed." Clara closed her eyes. She could feel Richard's gaze burning into the side of her head. He was enjoying this. This was his favorite game. Look at how much better I am than you. He had met her in a coffee shop in Seattle 7 years ago. She was a waitress. He was an analyst on a business trip. She was quiet, artistic, and mysterious. He liked the mystery then. He liked that she didn't know who he was or care about his money. But as his wealth grew, his ego ballooned and her quiet demeanor began to annoy him. He wanted a wife who looked good on a yacht, not one who spent her days covered in clay, refusing to attend his gala dinners. He had spent the last year systematically isolating her. He cut off her credit cards. He fired the housekeeper so she had to do everything. He mocked her in front of his friends. And now the final act, the public execution of her dignity. Clara Sarah whispered, leaning in. You have to give me something. You told me your father might be able to help with legal fees. Is he coming? We're getting slaughtered out here. Clara took a shaky breath. He said he would handle it. Sarah looked around the courtroom. Clara, there's no one here. It's just us. He's coming, Clara said, though her voice was barely a whisper. She touched the cheap locket around her neck. It was the only thing she had left from her childhood. Richard saw the interaction and leaned over to Silas. Look at her. She's probably praying to that deadbeat dad of hers, the alcoholic miner. God, I can't believe I slept with that for 7 years. Silas smirked. Don't worry, Richard. By lunch, she'll be begging to sign the papers just to make it stop. The morning session was a bloodbath. Silas Blackwood called Richard to the stand. Richard sat in the witness box looking the picture of aggrieved success. He adjusted his cufflinks, platinum engraved with his initials, and smiled charmingly at the judge. Mr. Van der Hoven, Silas asked, pacing the floor. Tell us about the early days of your marriage. Did the defendant work? I tried to encourage her. Richard lied effortlessly. I offered to set her up with a business, a gallery, anything. But she lacked drive. She preferred to sit in our apartment making these little clay pots. I think she sold one once for $10. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. $10? Silas repeated, shaking his head. And during this time, you were managing a portfolio of 200 million. Yes. The stress was immense. I needed a partner. I got a dependent. And what about her family? Did they contribute? Did they offer support? Richard's face twisted into a sneer of theatrical disgust. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he could publicly reveal the shameful lineage of his wife to ensure she would never be welcomed in high society again. Her family. Richard chuckled. Clara has no family. She told me her mother died when she was young. And her father. He paused, looking directly at Clara. Her father was a drifter, a copper miner from somewhere in the Dust Bowl of Australia or Nevada, I can't remember. She said he was a drunk who abandoned her when she was 18. I actually felt sorry for her. That's why I didn't push for a harsher prenup. I thought I was saving her from the gutter. Clara didn't move. She didn't react, but under the table her fingernails dug into her palms so hard a drop of blood welled up. A drunk, a drifter, abandoned her. That was the story she had told Richard. It was the story she had to tell. Because the truth was too dangerous. The truth would have complicated everything. She had wanted a life of her own, away from the shadow of the name Sterling. She had met Richard and thought he loved her. Not the money, not the legacy. Just Clara. So she hid the truth. And when she realized Richard was a monster, she was too afraid to go back to the father she had run away from. So Silas continued. We have a woman with a history of abandonment, likely seeking a father figure in you, capitalizing on your success while contributing nothing but debt and clutter. That's an accurate assessment, Richard said. And recently, Silas said, picking up a document, did Mrs. van der Hoven ask you for money? She did. Richard nodded. Last month, she asked for $50,000. She said it was for medical bills for her father. The same father she claimed was dead or missing for years. I refused, of course. I knew it was a scam. She was trying to siphon cash before the divorce. Sarah Jenkins. Clara's lawyer stood up. Objection, hearsay. There is no proof she was scamming. The proof is in the pattern, Richard shouted, breaking his calm demeanor. He pointed a finger at Clara. Look at her. She's wearing a dress I saw in a discount bin. She's playing the victim. She told me her father was a nobody, and then suddenly he needs 50 grand for heart surgery. It's a lie. She's a liar. She's nothing but a gold-digging peasant who got lucky. The courtroom went silent. The venom in Richard's voice was startling. Judge Harrison sighed. Mr. van der Hoven, restrain yourself. I'm sorry, Your Honor, Richard said, smoothing his tie, looking satisfied. It's just, it hurts to be used. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not because of what he said, but because of the text message she had received 10 minutes ago on her burner phone, hidden deep in her purse. I'm almost there, little bear. Hold the line. She hadn't called him in 10 years. But when Richard had frozen her accounts, and she couldn't afford the treatment for her own autoimmune condition, the medical bills Richard claimed were fake, she had no choice. She had called the number she had memorized as a child. She expected anger. She expected him to hang up. Instead, a deep, gravelly voice had answered on the first ring. Clara. Mr. Blackwood. Any further questions, the judge asked. Just one, Silas said. He turned to Clara. Mrs. van der Hoven is your father in this courtroom. Is this mysterious man, who needs $50,000 here to defend his honor? Clara looked up. She looked at the double doors at the back of the courtroom. They remained closed. Silas laughed. Let the record show the defendant is silent. Her father is not here. Because he likely doesn't exist, or he's sleeping off a hangover under a bridge somewhere. Richard leaned into the microphone. If he walks through those doors, I'll give her half my fortune. Hell, I'll give her everything. But we all know that's not going to happen. He mocked her. He challenged fate. And then, with a sound like a gunshot, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open. The noise was so loud, the court stenographer jumped. Heads whipped around. Standing in the doorway was not a drunk. It was not a drifter. It was a phalanx of 6 men in black suits. Security. Massive earpiece-wearing, stone-faced security. They stepped aside, creating a corridor. Walking through that corridor was a man in his late 60s. He leaned on a cane made of black obsidian, but he didn't need it. He moved with the terrifying energy of a thunderstorm contained in a human skin. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that made Richard's Keaton look like a Halloween costume. His white hair was swept back, his beard neatly trimmed, and his eyes, cold, steel-grey eyes, locked instantly onto Richard. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas Blackwood stopped smiling. He squinted. He recognized the man. Everyone in finance recognized the man. though he hadn't been seen in public in London or New York for a decade. The man walked down the center aisle. The click of his cane on the floorboards echoed in the silence. Click, click, click. He didn't stop at the gallery. He walked past the bar. He walked right up to the defense table and placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "I apologize for my tardiness." "Your Honor," the man said. His voice was deep, resonant, and commanded absolute obedience. Traffic on the tarmac was dreadful. The Gulf Stream had to wait. Judge Harrison took off his glasses. His hands were shaking slightly. And who are you, sir?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked at Richard, who had gone pale, his mouth slightly open. "I am the drunk," the man said softly. "I am the drifter." He turned to the judge. "I am Arthur Sterling, founder of Sterling Industries, owner of the Sterling Copper Group. And most importantly, I am Clara's father." Richard dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor, the only sound in a room that had suddenly stopped breathing. Arthur Sterling, the mining magnate. The man whose personal net worth was rumored to be in the tens of billions. The man who owned the mines that provided the raw materials for half the tech companies Richard invested in. Arthur looked at Richard, his eyes narrowing. "And you," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "must be the little boy who threw change at my daughter." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for bomb disposal units or the reading of a death sentence. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a crack of thunder. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered. "You are Arthur Sterling, the mining tycoon." Arthur didn't look at the judge. He was busy unbuttoning his suit jacket and taking the seat next to Clara. He moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of a glacier. He placed his obsidian cane across the table. "I am Arthur," replied his voice calm. "And I am here to represent my daughter's interests. I believe my counsel is entering the room now." As if on cue, a woman walked in. She was sharp-featured, wearing a crimson suit that looked like it was cut from blood and silk. It was Eleanor Graves, the most feared divorce attorney in Manhattan. She was known as the Widowmaker. Richard's lawyer, Silas Blackwood, actually took a step back when he saw her. Silas was a street brawler. Eleanor was a tactical nuke. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, dropping a briefcase the size of a small engine block onto the table. "I am entering my appearance as lead counsel for Mrs. Clara Sterling van der Hoven. I also have a motion to dismiss the plaintiff's claim for support and a counter-motion for forensic accounting of Mr. van der Hoven's assets." Richard found his voice. It was high and reedy. "Wait a minute. You can't just— she's a liar." "She told me her father was a nobody." Arthur slowly turned his head. He looked at Richard with an expression of mild curiosity, as if Richard were a particularly noisy insect. "She didn't lie." "Richard," Arthur said softly, "I was a drunk. I was absent. I made mistakes that drove my daughter away, to find a life where she wouldn't be judged by my checkbook. She wanted to be loved for herself. A test, if you will." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes hardening into flint. "And you failed that test spectacularly." "This is irrelevant," Silas shouted, trying to regain control of the room. "The father's wealth has no bearing on the marital assets. The prenuptial agreement stands. Clara signed it. She gets $50,000, and that is it." Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. $50,000. You threw change at her Richard Quarter's dimes. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold coin. It was heavy, stamped with the Sterling family crest. He flipped it in the air. It landed on the table with a heavy thud. You act like a king, Mr. van der Hoven, Arthur said. But you forget where kings get their gold. They get it from men like me, who dig it out of the dirt. Eleanor Graves spoke up. Your Honor, regarding the prenuptial agreement. If Mr. Blackwood had read the fine print of the Sterling Family Trust, which Clara is a beneficiary of, he would know that any commingling of assets with a spouse without the trust's approval triggers an automatic audit of the spouse's finances to ensure no criminal liability falls upon the trust. So Richard sneered. Audit me. I'm clean. I made my money trading. Did you? Arthur asked. He signaled to one of the bodyguards, who handed him a blue folder. Arthur slid it across the table toward Richard. I've spent the last 12 hours looking into your hedge fund. Apex Capital, Arthur said. You pride yourself on your vision, Richard. You shorted lithium stocks right before a supply glut. You shorted copper right before a strike ended. You've been a genius. Richard puffed out his chest. I know the market. No, Arthur corrected him. You know my schedule. The room gasped. Every major trade you made in the last 5 years? Arthur explained, his voice deadly calm, coincided with confidential movement reports from Sterling Mining Logistics. You were hacking Clara's laptop. You were reading her emails to me, the few she sent. You were trading on insider information regarding my company's supply chains. Richard's face went grey. That's absurd, Richard stammered. Clara didn't talk to you. She received monthly updates on the family trust, Arthur said. Updates you accessed. Updates you used to bet against my companies. You didn't just abuse my daughter, you stole from her heritage to build your empire. Arthur stood up, towering over the table. You wanted to invoke the law, Richard Good, because insider trading carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years. And I have the logs. Judge Harrison looked at the blue folder. He looked at Richard, who was now sweating profusely. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said sternly, I suggest you advise your client to sit down and shut up. Mrs. Graves, are you filing criminal charges? Not yet, Your Honor. Eleanor smiled, showing teeth. Mr. Sterling prefers to settle family matters. Personally. We just want the divorce finalized today, on our terms. The court ordered a 1-hour recess. The revelation of potential insider trading had turned the proceedings into a circus. Reporters were texting furiously on their phones. Richard rushed out into the hallway, Silas trailing behind him. You told me she was a nobody, Silas hissed, pinning Richard against the marble wall near the water fountains. You told me we could bully her. That is Arthur goddamned Sterling. He eats governments for breakfast. I didn't know, Richard shrieked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. She never said his name. She just said, Arthur. How was I supposed to know she was that Sterling? Well, you better fix it, Silas warned. Because if he goes to the SEC with those logs, you're not losing a divorce case. You're going to federal prison, and I'm not going down with you. Richard pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped it once before unlocking it. He needed to check his positions. He needed to liquidate. If he could move the money to the Cayman Islands before the freeze hit, maybe he could run. He opened his brokerage app. Login failed. He tried again. Account locked. Please contact institution. No, Richard whispered. No, no, no. He dialed his banker at Sovereign Trust. This is Richard van der Hoven. Why is my account locked? The voice on the other end was cold. Mr. van der Hoven. We received a notification of a suspicious activity report filed by the compliance officer at Sterling Industries, combined with a liquidity withdrawal request from your primary lender. Liquidity withdrawal. What are you talking about? My primary lender is the Orion Group. Yes, the banker said. And Orion Group was acquired 40 minutes ago. Richard froze. Acquired by who? Sterling Global Holdings. Richard dropped the phone. It didn't crack, but his reality did. Arthur hadn't just come to court. He hadn't just brought a lawyer. While Richard was busy throwing change at Clara Arthur, Sterling had instructed his holding company to buy the debt of the bank that Richard used to leverage his trades. Richard van der Hoven didn't own his money. He owed it, and now he owed it to his father-in-law. Richard turned around and saw Clara standing by the window at the end of the hall. She was looking out at the New York skyline. Arthur stood next to her, his back to the room, creating a wall between her and the world. Richard ran over. He didn't care about dignity anymore. He cared about survival. Clara, he shouted. One of the bodyguards stepped forward, but Arthur raised a hand to stop him. Arthur turned around, leaning on his cane, watching Richard approach. Clara, please, Richard, begged, stopping 5 feet away. He looked at her eyes, weighed and desperate. Baby, tell him. Tell him it was just a fight. Couples fight, right? I was angry. I didn't mean the things I said. We can fix this. I love you. Clara turned slowly. For the first time all day, she looked him in the eye. Her face was dry. The tears were gone. In their place was the same steel that was in her father's eyes. You threw coins at me, Richard, she said quietly. I was stressed. The market is crashing. No, Clara said. You did it because you liked it. You liked making me feel small. You wanted me to be small so you could feel big. She took a step closer to her father. I ran away from my father because I was afraid of his power, Clara said. I didn't want to be controlled. But you tried to control me with weakness. You used my silence against me. I can make it up to you, Richard pleaded. I'll give you half. I'll sign whatever you want. Just tell him not to call the loan. If he calls the loan, I'm bankrupt, Clara. I'll have nothing. Clara looked at her father. Arthur looked down at her. His expression unreadable, waiting for her decision. He mocked me. Dad, Clara said softly. Arthur nodded. He did. He said I was worth less than the change on the floor. He did. Clara looked back at Richard. Then I think he should see what it feels like to count every penny. Clara turned to Arthur. Do it. Arthur pulled out his phone. He didn't dial. He just pressed a single button on the screen and put it back in his pocket. Richard's phone buzzed on the floor where he had dropped it. Then it buzzed again, and again. A cacophony of notifications. Email. Margin call notice. Immediate action required. Email asset freeze notification. Email eviction notice. Penthouse suite. Richard fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs gave out. He knelt on the dirty courthouse linoleum, surrounded by lawyers and strangers. "You can't do this," Richard whispered. Arthur stepped closer, looming over him. "I just did," Arthur said. "I bought your debt, Richard. All of it. The mortgage on your penthouse, the leverage on your fund, the lease on your Aston Martin. I own it all, and I am calling it in, right now." Arthur leaned down, his face inches from Richard's. "You have until close of business today to pay me $300 million. Or I take everything. The suits, the watch, the car, and I leave you with exactly what you left my daughter with." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change quarters, nickels, dimes. He opened his hand and let them rain down on Richard's head. Clink, clatter, ping. "Change," Arthur whispered. The week following the trial was not a decline for Richard van der Hoven. It was a free fall. Arthur Sterling was a man of his word. By 5:00 p.m. on the day of the trial, the locks were changed on the penthouse overlooking Central Park. Richard arrived to find his doorman, a man named Henry, whom Richard had ignored for 5 years, standing with a clipboard and a pitying smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. van der Hoven," Henry said, blocking the revolving door. "Management has been instructed to deny you entry. Your personal effects clothes and toiletries have been boxed and sent to the storage facility in Queens." "Queens?" Richard spat. His face flushed. "My suits are worth more than your life. You can't send them to a storage unit in Queens." "I can," Henry said, his smile fading. "And I did." The new owner was very specific. Richard slept that night in a motel near JFK Airport. He tried to call his friends, the bankers he drank with, the analysts. He tipped off the women he flirted with at galas. Number disconnected. Sent to voicemail. "Richard. Look, don't call me. It's toxic to be seen with you right now." He was radioactive. In the world of high finance, losing money is a sin, but making an enemy of Arthur Sterling is a death sentence. No firm would hire him. No bank would lend to him. But Richard van der Hoven suffered from a disease common to narcissists he could not believe he had lost. In his mind, this was a temporary setback, a misunderstanding, a plot twist he could write his way out of. He spent his last few $1,000s, cash he had hidden in a gym bag, hiring a private investigator. He needed dirt. If Arthur Sterling wanted to play dirty with insider trading accusations, Richard would find something worse. 3 days later, he was sitting in a dingy diner, meeting with the investigator, a grease-stained man named Miller. "Well?" Richard asked, drumming his fingers on the table. "What did you find?" "Illegal dumping bribes in Africa." "Sterling must have skeletons." Miller tossed a thin manila envelope onto the table. "He's clean, Richard. Cleaner than the Pope. The guy runs his mines with solar power and pays his workers double the union rate. He's untouchable." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Nobody is untouchable. What about Clara? Is she seeing someone? Is she on drugs?" "Clara is busy," Miller said, pointing to a flyer he pulled from the envelope. Richard grabbed it. It was an invitation. "From the Earth, a debut exhibition by C. Sterling. Location, the Art House Gallery. Soho. Date tonight." Richard stared at the paper. "She's having an art show. Now while I'm living in a motel." "Apparently she's been working on this collection for years," Miller said, taking a bite of his burger. The buzz is huge, not just because of the divorce, but because the art critics actually like it. She's going to be the toast of the town tonight. Richard felt a cold, sharp rage settle in his gut. She was rising while he was sinking. She was using his notoriety, his suffering, to launch her little pottery career. It was insulting. It was theft. She thinks she's won. Richard whispered, crushing the flyer in his fist. He stood up, throwing a $20 bill on the table. "Where are you going?" Miller asked. "To the art show," Richard said, his eyes manic. "I think the critics deserve to know the real inspiration behind her work." The art house gallery was glowing. Champagne flutes clinked, jazz played softly, and the elite of New York's art scene mingled around pedestals displaying Clara's work. The pieces were haunting, twisted, beautiful ceramics that looked like they were in pain, but also breaking free. One series, titled The Cage, featured delicate porcelain birds trapped in gold wire. The sold stickers were already on almost every piece. Clara stood in the center of the room, wearing a stunning backless emerald gown. She looked regal. She looked free. Arthur stood nearby, beaming like a lighthouse holding court with the mayor. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like the poor girl hiding her past, nor the trophy wife hiding her pain. She felt like herself. Then the glass front door shattered. Not metaphorically. Physically. Richard van der Hoven, drunk and disheveled, had thrown a trash can through the glass pane of the gallery entrance. The music stopped. The crowd screamed and scattered. Richard stepped through the broken glass. He was wearing the same suit from court, now rumpled and stained. He looked wild. "Bravo!" Richard screamed, clapping his hands mockingly. "Bravo, what a show! What a performance!" Security guards started to move in, but Arthur raised a hand. He stepped in front of Clara, his cane held ready like a weapon. Richard Arthur boomed his voice, filling the silent gallery. "You are trespassing, and you are drunk." "I'm celebrating," Richard yelled, stumbling toward a pedestal. He grabbed one of Clara's vases, a beautiful, fragile thing glazed in blue. "I'm celebrating my wife's success. I'm the muse, aren't I? Clara, this pain, this suffering I gave you that I made you." He held the vase over his head. "Richard, put it down," Clara said. Her voice wasn't shaky this time. It was angry. "Or what?" Richard sneered. "You'll call Daddy. You're nothing without him, Clara. You're nothing without me. You were a waitress. I made you a socialite." He threw the vase. It smashed against the wall, exploding into 1,000 blue shards. The crowd gasped. That Richard laughed, pointing at the debris, is what you are. Broken pieces. Clara walked out from behind her father. Arthur tried to stop her, but she touched his arm gently. "I've got this," her eyes said. She walked across the gallery floor, the glass crunching under her heels. She stopped 3 feet from Richard. She looked at the man who had tormented her for 7 years. The man she had feared. He looked so small now, so pathetic. "You're right, Richard," Clara said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "I was broken. You broke me. Every day with your words, with your greed, with your cruelty." She gestured to the art around the room. "But you forgot something about clay. You have to break it down to build it up. You have to put it through the fire to make it strong." Clara stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "I am not the pieces on the floor. I am the fire that hardened them. And you're just the ash left behind." Richard's face twisted in fury. He raised his hand to strike her. "You ungrateful beast!" Before his hand could descend, a cane hooked around his wrist. Arthur Sterling moved with speed that belied his age. He yanked Richard's arm back, twisting it, until Richard howled in pain and dropped to his knees. 2 security guards were on him instantly, pinning him to the floor. Sirens wailed in the distance. "Let me go," Richard screamed, his face pressed against the floorboards. "You can't arrest me for breaking a vase. I'll pay for it. I still have rights." Arthur stood over him, adjusting his cuffs. "Oh, the police aren't coming for the vase, Richard," Arthur said pleasantly. Richard froze. What Arthur pulled a folded document from his pocket. "While you were playing detective this week, my forensic accountants finished their audit of your hedge fund," Arthur said. "It turns out insider trading wasn't your only hobby. You've been running a Ponzi scheme, Richard. You've been using new investor money to pay off old debts to keep up your lifestyle." The color drained from Richard's face. That's a lie." "The FBI doesn't think so," Arthur said. "They've been building a case for months. I just gave them the missing piece, your private ledger, the one you kept on the laptop you thought you wiped." The police burst through the shattered door. They didn't look confused. They went straight for Richard. As they hauled him up, handcuffed and weeping, Richard looked back at Clara. "Clara, help me. Please, I'm your husband." Clara looked at him then, down at the broken blue vase on the floor. She bent down, picked up a single shard, and placed it in his jacket pocket. "Keep the change," she said. The visiting room at the Otisville Federal Correctional Institution was a study in misery painted in shades of industrial gray and peeling beige. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the sharp metallic tang of despair. For Richard van der Hoven, a man who had once refused to stay in hotel suites with fewer than 600 thread-count sheets, this room was a special kind of hell. He sat on a bolted-down metal stool, his knees knocking against the cold underside of the partition. The bespoke Keaton suits that had been his armor against the world were gone, replaced by a drab khaki jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. The fabric was rough, scratching at his skin, a constant reminder of his fall. He had lost 30 pounds in 12 months. His hair, once thick and meticulously styled with imported pomade, was now thinning, greasy, and shot through with premature grey. He stared at the clock on the wall. It buzzed loudly with every second that ticked by. Tick, buzz. Tick, buzz. He was waiting. When the heavy steel door on the other side of the room buzzed open, Richard straightened up. He tried to summon the ghost of his old charisma, the shark-like confidence that had charmed investors and intimidated rivals. He smoothed his jumpsuit as if it were a tuxedo. Then he saw her. Clara walked in. The transformation was subtle but devastating. Richard remembered a woman who walked with her head down, shoulders hunched, always trying to occupy as little space as possible. The woman walking toward him now consumed the room. She wore no designer armor, no flash. She was dressed in simple, dark denim jeans and a crisp white linen shirt. Her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, messy bun, revealing a face that was free of makeup and glowing with a terrifying calmness. She sat down opposite him. The thick, scratched plexiglass barrier stood between them like a slice of frozen time. Richard picked up the black plastic phone receiver. His hand trembled. He hated that. He hated that his body betrayed his fear. Clara picked up her receiver. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him with a gaze that was clearer than water and harder than diamond. "You came," Richard croaked. His voice was raspy. He hadn't spoken to anyone but guards and cellmates for weeks. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here to close the loop," Clara said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremble he used to exploit. "My lawyer sent the asset relinquishment papers 3 times. You refused to sign them." Richard forced a smile. It was a grotesque imitation of his old charm, stretching thin over his gaunt face. "I wanted to see you, Clara. I needed to see you. You look good. Healthy. Is that a new shirt?" "The papers, Richard," she repeated, ignoring his attempt at small talk. She slid a thick manila envelope through the document slot at the bottom of the glass. "This ends today." Richard didn't look at the envelope. He leaned in his breath, fogging the glass. "Clara, listen to me," he whispered, his eyes darting around to see if the guards were listening. "It's a nightmare in here. You have no idea. The food is inedible. The noise, it never stops. I can't sleep. I'm surrounded by animals." "You're surrounded by people who broke the law," Clara corrected him. "Just like you." "I didn't break the law." Richard hissed, a flash of his old arrogance cutting through the desperation. "I bent the rules. Everyone does it. Your father does it. He just has better lawyers. I was trying to build something for us, Clara. For our future. I did this for you." Clara finally reacted. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. "For me?" she asked. "You humiliated me in open court for me. You threw coins at my face for me. You isolated me from the world for me." "I was stressed," Richard pleaded. "I was under pressure. You know how I get. But I'm changed now. This place, it's humbled me. I've had time to think. I miss you, Clara. I miss us." He paused, waiting for her to soften. In the past, this was when she would crumble. She would apologize for upsetting him. She would try to fix it. But Clara just stared at him. She looked at him not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "There is no us, Richard," she said softly. "There never was. There was just a predator and a meal. And I'm done being food." She tapped the glass where the envelope lay. "Sign the papers. If you sign, you relinquish any claim to the marital assets, what's left of them after the SEC and the DOJ stripped you clean. In exchange, I walk away, and I don't file the civil suit for emotional distress that my father's lawyers have prepared. If you don't sign, we file. And if we file, you'll be transferred to a maximum security facility in Texas to await the civil trial. I hear the heat there is unbearable this time of year." Richard went pale. The threat was precise and lethal. He knew Arthur Sterling had the reach to make it happen. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Try me," Clara said. Richard looked at the pen the guard had placed on the ledge. He looked at Clara. He saw the wall he had hit. There was no way around it. No charm, no lie, no leverage would work here. Defeated, he pulled the papers out. He flipped to the back page, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled against the metal counter. He signed his name, Richard van der Hoven, a signature that used to move millions of dollars. Now it was worth nothing. He shoved the papers back through the slot. There he spat his voice, trembling with a mix of rage and grief. "You have what you want. You stripped me. I have nothing. Are you happy?" Is the billionaire's daughter happy now that she's destroyed the little guy? Clara took the papers and placed them calmly in her bag. I didn't destroy you, Richard. You destroyed yourself. I just survived the wreckage. She stood up. The movement was final. Panic surged through Richard. The reality of her leaving, of him being left alone in this grey box, hit him like a physical blow. "Wait!" he shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. The sound echoed through the room, drawing the glare of a guard. "Clara, don't just walk away." She stopped, turning back slowly. "Please, Richard," begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelids, cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "I have nothing, literally nothing. They charge for everything here. Soap, toothpaste, coffee. I haven't had a cup of coffee in 3 weeks. My commissary account is empty." He pressed his forehead against the glass. "Do you have any cash?" "Just $20. 50 anything. Please, Clara, for old time's sake, show me some mercy." Clara stood there for a long moment. She looked at the man who had once treated her like an accessory, an object to be mocked and discarded. She remembered the courtroom, the laughter, the coins hitting the floor. "Mercy," she repeated, testing the word. She reached into her leather shoulder bag. Richard's eyes widened. He licked his lips. She's going to do it, he thought. She still cares. She's still that weak little girl. Clara pulled out a small, heavy pouch made of dark blue velvet. It was tied with a gold string. It looked expensive. "I brought this for you," she said. "Thank you." Richard wept, relief washing over him. "Thank you, baby. I knew you had a heart." Clara stepped forward and slid the pouch through the metal slot. Richard grabbed it with both hands. It was heavy, dense. He fumbled with the string, his fingers clumsy with anticipation. He imagined rolled-up $100 bills. Maybe gold jewelry he could trade. He upended the pouch onto the metal counter. Clink, clatter, ping. A shower of metal rained down. It wasn't gold. It wasn't silver. It was change. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. A chaotic pile of copper and nickel that spun and settled on the cold steel. Richard froze. The sound of the coins seemed to echo endlessly in his ears. He looked up at Clara, his mouth open in silent shock. "I kept the change," Clara said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "You told the court I was worth less than the change on the floor. I thought you might need it more than I do now." She didn't wait for him to respond. She didn't wait for the scream of rage that was building in his throat. She turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. Clara Richard screamed, sweeping the coins off the counter in a fury. They scattered across the floor, rolling under the stools lost in the corners of the room. "Clara, come back here. You can't do this to me." The door buzzed shut behind her, cutting off his voice. Outside, the air was crisp and tasted of autumn leaves and gasoline. It was the sweetest thing Clara had ever smelled. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb. Leaning against the hood was Arthur Sterling. He looked older than he had a year ago, leaning a bit heavier on his obsidian cane, but his eyes were still sharp as flint. He was watching a hawk circle in the sky above the prison fences. When he saw Clara, he straightened up. He didn't ask how it went. He saw the set of her jaw, the lightness in her step. He knew. "Is it done?" Arthur asked, opening the rear door for her. "It's done," Clara said. She paused before getting in. Looking back at the grim concrete fortress one last time, she felt a weight lift off her chest, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for 7 years. "The board meeting for the foundation starts at 2, Arthur noted, checking his watch. "The directors are flying in from London. They're eager to meet the chairwoman." Clara smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. She had used her divorce settlement, every single penny of it, along with a matching donation from her father, to launch the Blue Vase Foundation. It was a non-profit dedicated to providing forensic accounting and top-tier legal defense for women trapped in financially abusive marriages. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a weapon for others. "Let's go, Dad," Clara said, sliding into the leather seat. Arthur climbed in beside her. As the car pulled away, leaving the prison fading into the grey horizon, Arthur grunted. "You know," he mused, tapping his cane on the floor mat, "I could have bought the prison. We could have turned the heat off in his cell block. Just a thought." Clara laughed, a full, rich sound that filled the car. She took her father's hand. "I know you could have Dad, but he's not worth the paperwork. Besides," she said, looking out the window at the open road ahead, "I gave him exactly what he gave me. Nothing more, nothing less." The car sped up, merging onto the highway, carrying Clara Sterling toward a future that was finally, undeniably her own. Richard van der Hoeven spent the next 8 years in federal prison. He entered those gates as a man who believed that net worth defined human value, and he left with nothing but the pocket change his wife left him. Clara Sterling never remarried, but she didn't need to. She became one of the most influential philanthropists in New York, proving that dignity is the one asset that never depreciates. This story reminds us of a brutal, necessary truth. Arrogance is just a loan you take out against your future, and eventually life makes a margin call. Richard thought his wife's silence was submission. He didn't realize she was just saving her energy for the moment it mattered most. He learned the hard way that when you treat people like they are worthless, you are only defining yourself. Now I have a question for you. What would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have shown mercy and given him a second chance, or was the bag of coins the perfect ending? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story of betrayal and revenge. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on, because you never know who is holding the ladder.